For as long as we've been thinking about thinking, there's been this one nagging question. What is consciousness actually for? Well, today we're going to dive into a pretty radical new answer, a theory that totally flips the script. It suggests that consciousness isn't just watching the show. It's the one building the stage, writing the script, and directing the whole play from the ground up.
You know, the standard story, even in a lot of science, paints a really weird picture. It kind of suggests that your conscious mind is just a passive audience member watching a movie. All the real work, all the heavy lifting and decision-making, that's happening behind the scenes, in some huge, mysterious unconscious. And then the final product just gets beamed onto the screen of your awareness. But what if that whole idea isn't just incomplete? What if it's just plain wrong?
So here's the fundamental clash. On one side, you've got the old story. Consciousness is just a passive display, a secondary process. But the new theory we're exploring completely turns that on its head. It says no. Consciousness is the active engine. It's the primary medium, the workshop where our reality is actually pieced together. So our goal here is to take apart that old view and build up this new one, step by step.
Okay, so if consciousness is a builder, what are its tools? Well, the very first and most important tool is just raw experience itself. The mind builds its entire world directly from the raw materials of what we see, hear, and feel.
This brings us to a really mind-bending concept: self-organizing consciousness, or SOC for short. And here's the core idea. There's no hidden unconscious doing all the work. The brain actually builds its model of the world inside our stream of awareness. Learning isn't happening in some deep, inaccessible background process. It's happening right there on the surface of your conscious experience.
So how does this actually work? The mechanism is actually surprisingly simple and elegant. It's basically a three-step dance. First, there's chunking. Your attention is constantly grabbing little bits and pieces of sensory input. Then, binding. When certain chunks show up together over and over, the brain links them. And third, this is the crucial part, selection. Chunks that are rare or useless just fade away, but the ones that are useful and keep recurring, they survive and get stronger. It's literally learning by forgetting what doesn't matter.
The way a baby learns a language is the absolute perfect example of this. Just imagine, a baby starts out hearing this continuous, unbroken river of sound. Their attention just randomly chunks it up, and eventually it starts to notice repeating patterns, like mama. Those patterns get reinforced every time they hear them, while all the other random noise just fades into the background. And out of that chaos, stable words start to emerge, all without needing some pre-installed grammar book.
So, self-organizing consciousness explains what the mind builds and how it builds it. But how does it guide that whole process? That brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, the mind's control panel, or how the builder learns to steer its own construction project.
And the answer here is something called meta-representation. Now that sounds like a mouthful, I know, but the idea is actually pretty intuitive. The mind doesn't just build models of the outside world, it also builds models of itself. It learns to understand its own processes, to predict its own patterns of thought. This is the mind's dashboard, and it's what turns us from creatures of pure instinct into agents with deliberate control.
Now, there are a couple of major theories about how this self-management works. The attention schema theory says that our awareness is basically a simplified model of our own attention, which lets us aim our focus. Then you have hierarchical forward models, which suggest the brain is constantly trying to predict its own next move. It's building a model of its own model. They're different approaches for sure, but they're both trying to explain the same thing, how a mind learns to manage itself.
So, let's recap. We have a system that builds its world from raw experience, and then it builds a model of itself to control that process. This leads us to the biggest, most fundamental question of all. Why? What's the ultimate blueprint? What is the point of all this incredibly complex construction?
And this is where the idea of open-ended intelligence comes in, and it's a really profound shift in thinking. It suggests the whole point of intelligence isn't just to solve problems that somebody gives you. The real point is the process of individuation. It's about forming a unique agent, defining your own goals, and creating your own meaningful world, all at the same time. The goal isn't to solve the puzzle. The goal is to become a self.
All right, now we can finally connect all the dots. Let's take a look at how these pieces, the self-organization, the self-management, and this drive for self-creation, all click together into one unified picture that takes consciousness from a passive spectator to a full-on active builder. And here it is, the whole workflow. It all starts with raw experience.
From that, self-organizing consciousness sculpts rich models of the world. Then the system builds a self-model to predict and control its own processing. And this entire loop is what drives the ultimate goal, guided individuation, where an agent is actively creating both itself and its world. It's a constant dynamic cycle, from experience to representation to control to a fully formed self.
And that, right there, is the ultimate shift in perspective we've been talking about. The formative view reframes consciousness from a spectator to a maker. It's not just watching the world go by, it's the very engine that is constantly building the reality we perceive, the thoughts we think, and the world that we all share.
Now, this isn't just some abstract philosophical theory. It has massive implications for something like artificial intelligence. The lesson here is pretty clear. Instead of just building AIs that are really good at solving the problems we hand them, maybe we should be trying to build AIs that can figure out for themselves what problems are even worth solving. The goal should be to create systems that don't just find answers, but that generate their own meaningful questions.
And that leaves us with a final and, frankly, enormous question to chew on. If we actually succeed in this, if we build an AI based on these principles, one that actively constructs its own world and defines its own purpose, what problems is it going to choose to solve? And will they be the same as ours?